Hi, I'm Suzanne Siracuse, and welcome to season 2 of my podcast, focused on the future, keys to building a profitable, sustainable, and impactful business. And I'm excited to be partnering with wealthmanagement.com on this. This series will focus on what firms need to embrace to ensure their growth and success for the future. And you'll hear from industry leaders and advisors on what is working for them. I have a great lineup of guests in store, and today I'm talking with Vanessa Martinez. Vanessa is the CEO and managing partner of Expressive Wealth, an RIA that is dedicated to aligning a client's financial goals with their holistic well-being. She is also the co-author of the book Family Value at Risk: Inclusive Communication to Pass on Your Family's Wealth and Legacy. Love that. Welcome, Vanessa. Thank you so much for being my guest. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today.
Me too. I'm excited.
Great, great. So I always start off the podcast with the same question to everybody, and that is, tell us about your journey in becoming a financial planner and now firm owner. What's your story? How did you get to where you are now?
I'm going to go a little further back on this story. So instead of like when you started working, I'm going to go all the way to my baby years, but I'll be quick.
I love it.
I won't make it boring, I promise. So growing up, education was very, very important in my household. My mother was only allowed to finish 6th grade because of the Civil War in Guatemala. And then a few years later, that obviously trickled to the neighboring country, which is El Salvador, which is where my father's from. So my father only got to finish high school because at the time that it was college time, the colleges got shut down because of the Civil War that broke out in El Salvador. So this is so impactful because they never had the opportunity. So because that was taken from them, they pushed very hard for their 3 daughters to go to school and learn as much as you can. Living in that type of environment, one of the things that they'd repeat to us that what you learn and education is the one piece no one can ever take from you. So that was so ingrained in us that it made sure that we just kept going to school. I went abroad for my undergrad, came back to Chicago for my MBA. And obviously I went to school throughout. I've been working since 14. So work was always a part of my life. But then after my MBA, I definitely fell in love with wealth management and what I consider to be the true wealth management, right? The all-encompassing wealth management, not just the investment side. And one of those pieces about me is I'm very much big picture visionary type of person. And I knew that I needed to build something that allowed the delivery of that all-encompassing approach. So that's why I started my own practice. And of course, community is key. So I didn't do it on my own, right? We're a team of 8 and I love it.
Oh my gosh. Well, thanks for sharing that. First of all, we all do take for granted, I shouldn't say we all, but many of us take for granted education and going to school and that whole what's considered,
Normal.
would all be able to go, and you would never think that that wouldn't be an option, but that actually happens in many parts of the world still to this day. So thanks for sharing your story and how that actually impacted you even more now. And your parents sound like wonderful people to really make sure that you got that education that they didn't have the ability to get, which is just such a shame. I want to ask you, you went and through all of this and it came out and got your MBA. What drove you to wealth management? You said you fell in love with it, but how were you exposed to it? Did you take a class? Like how did that all come to be?
There was 2 classes, one in my undergrad when I went to school abroad, which I went to Guatemala, to my mother's hometown. And there was a professor there teaching it was more the typical finance, right? Like cost analysis that
Mm-hmm.
I first fell in love with. Understanding that moving pieces around allowed a more productive outcome. That was so exciting to know that you can just change something so small and make such a big impact.
Wow.
And in that class, he always told me, this is just the beginning. Now you have to implement that in people's day to day. And he'd always tell me that, and I never kind of got the gist. When I came back to Chicago, I started working at Chase, at JP Morgan. And there, as a banker and getting the licenses and going through that process, then it clicked from what he had told me. These are the minor changes that you can make in your day to day, but affect that true outcome in the future. And I realized that if you are given the, let's call it the gift of understanding this, because not everybody truly embraces that piece. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're given that, then my goal is to share that. So I felt because I learned it so well and I enjoyed it so much, and I found it, I don't want to use the word easy, but I found it, I'm going to use it, easy to help families say, if you incorporate this and you look at that, then we're able to kind of reach those goals that some people only dream of sometimes, but they're not dreams. We can really reach them if you make these minor adjustments. I think that just made me fall in love with it. And I went from banking to the wealth management side.
Got it. Got it. That's an interesting connection. And so many times there is that one teacher that really has that impact on us. And his words really resonated with you, it sounds like. So we're glad that that happened the way it did so that you're part of this profession.
Agreed.
So, the podcast is all about the future. And so from your perspective, what do advisors need to do now in order to best serve that client of the future? And what are you doing in your practice?
I think there are a few things that have impacted the world in general, which is technology. And what that has brought on is longevity, right? So when you're planning for families, I think if you look back historically, the age of death went from 40 to 50 to 60 to retirement age, they keep pushing it out, right? The time frame on when you have to take your required minimum distribution is now further out. And they keep doing this because longevity is what's considered the risk now. So understanding that you need to plan for that, that is what advisors really need to focus on, as well as diversity and blended families. Those are two things that are also impacting our just environment overall. If you are used to, and when I mean diversity, I mean it in a large frame, which is not just race or ethnicity. I'm talking about thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
right? It could be anything. So many like to use the word, I love sitting with like-minded individuals. Well, what happens when you do that is you all think the same and continue to think the same. So I think as an advisor, you truly need to sit with maybe not like-minded individuals to be able to understand why people think differently and how you can come to understand them better. Right. So listening is a great skill that some of us believe we fully know how to do, but few of us can actually do it. So I think understanding those pieces, and many say, oh, make sure you don't shame the individual when it comes to budgeting and planning. But I think that also leans into the family dynamics of blended families, right? You can't just assume all the kids are treated the same in your estate plan. You can't assume your families are going to pay for everyone's college. So the assumption needs to come out of our vocabulary. Whatever has worked in the past might not be for the future. So if you actually listen to the family that's sitting across from you at the table, you'll truly be able to understand them and give that great advice for their future.
Those are such great bits of advice and things for advisors to think about. I'm so glad that you mentioned all of them. You know, what's really interesting is I haven't heard on this podcast I've been doing for 2 years, um, much talk about longevity and the longevity risk. And I'm so glad that you brought it up, because really that is a monumental change from, 10, 15 years ago, right? More and more people living longer. The risk that goes into that, the blended families, and that is just more frequent than not anymore. Listening, don't make assumptions. Those are just really, really great best practices and things for our listeners to think about. But I'm really excited that you highlighted that longevity risk and that discussion and how that really impacts planning. So those are great. Now, you kind of touched on it a little bit. You were kind of going there in your answer before, but I know you are a big believer in understanding the psychological component in investing and planning discussions, right? In fact, you're about to release a book on this, I believe. So can you discuss the key learnings you have found and why advisors should pay more attention to the psychological component when working with clients? I'm fascinated with this, by the way.
I think it's really redefining wealth. When you Google it, what comes up? When you think about it, what comes up? When you talk about it with your friends, what comes up? Dollars, right? It's always about dollars. So I think the psychological side, what that allows you to do is hear and tell a story from a different light. Just like when you asked, tell me how you came to be in the business. I told you history because that is a proponent to why I think the way I think and why I do the things I do, right? So that is what the psychological piece does when you incorporate that into the planning aspect, right? There's emotional wealth, intellectual wealth, and financial wealth. It's not just one. So you need to have all those pieces, but you don't know them if you don't talk about them. And how do you have people talk about them? So some advisors listening might say, oh, I don't know how to make my client talk about those things. Maybe they're not ready. And that's okay. What are you doing to help them be ready for those conversations, right? And I'm sure you sat with many people in your life, Suzanne, and there's people you feel fully comfortable to be vulnerable with and people you do not. So you as an advisor need to be that person that clients can be vulnerable with. And if you're not, then, oh, that sounds horrible. I was going to say you need help, but in a good way, in a good way. We all need it, right? We all need it. So I'm not excluding myself from the needing resources, but this is why we have a doctor in psychology on the team, because I know I need it. I know that there are some conversations that I'm like, dang, I wish I could have said it this way, or I didn't know what to say. I froze up because I've never heard someone say something like that to me. So I think those are the pieces. It's learning on how to allow yourself to be that person where others can be vulnerable with you. But that takes learning, right? Some of us have a little bit of that skill already, just born in us, but some of us need more work than others, I'll say.
So I think that's a really good point. First of all, I so believe that that psychological component affects, it's almost like this, and as an advisor, you're missing a big piece of information that doesn't get filled out in the questionnaire, the client questionnaire, or isn't on your budget statement from the client, isn't in their bank account or assets or retirement accounts, but it's what how you were motivated from a money standpoint. What are your fears, etc. And there's so many. I was just reading an article from Dr. Daniel Crosby around that, around exactly this, and how behavioral finance is going to become even more important to a financial advisor's role. So I'm glad that you're bringing this up. So you have a psychiatrist or a doctor on staff. What
A
about what
psychologist. Psychologist.
psychologist. Thank you
Yes.
for correcting that. What if you don't have that? What advice do you have for an advisor that maybe is like, you know what, I don't know if I have the right skill set to do this. What do you recommend them do?
I think I didn't prepare for this, but I know that there are institutions, firms, practices that support advisors in exactly that. So I
Got
would
it.
say, I get it, not all of us can have that on the team, but there are different resources that will help you kind of learn those skills. That's why the CFP has one of its sections on specifically the psychological side, right? So I think where the industry is leaning in that direction. We just have to make sure that we're doing it with the intention of being helpful and not with any kind of intention to have people make decisions in a certain way, right? Because that's the behavioral psychology tends to lean on the learning of why decisions are made and understanding that piece. But all psychology is just kind of the human condition. We all grow up, we all fall in love, we all experience death, right? So it's all of the pieces, not just why do you make that decision? What did you go through to help understand why you made that decision?
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think you're going to find more and more firms starting to invest in that kind of person on their teams, especially like some of the larger firms. And I think a lot of the solution providers are starting to invest in someone on their teams to help advisors in that practice management area too.
Yeah,
Right.
it's internal, right? It's not just,
Yeah.
I think too many times wealth management practices also lean in that area that we're here to provide solutions for the families that we work with. But how about the families that support us in our day to day, right? The families that are here in this office with me. So it also needs to come from within where we're supporting and building that good culture inside to be able to kind of deliver that.
Yeah, I love that you're doing that. That's fantastic and fascinating at the same time. So, as I mentioned, you recently started your own RIA, Expressive Wealth. So, what have been your what I wish I knew before I launched moments that you can share with others who are thinking about doing the same?
Ooh, that's a hard one because I've definitely made mistakes, but I think that it's kind of, you don't know what you don't know, right? You get pregnant for the first time, you're having a baby, people have told you about it, there's movies on it, there's books on it, but until you experience it, do you really understand the extreme pain? So I think that kind of ties to building your own practice, right? There's pieces that you don't know, so you can't fully prepare for them. But what I would say for those thinking of doing it is I personally like a team approach. So I don't like things on my own. I like the collaborative. I like other people being smart in the room. So my approach is always more is better than, right? Two heads is better than one.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say ask questions. I think there's so many of us out there that are willing to share. I've had at least 5 other advisors come to me. I launched in March, mind you, that have found me and have asked, hey, can I pick your brain And my answer is yes. If you come at this time and come with concrete questions, of course I will, right? Because we're all different and we all want to add this piece, but not that piece. So what were all the pieces that you added? What did you love? What did you hate? Like tech platforms and things like that. But they don't all work for everyone. So I could hate it, but you could love it. But let me tell you what I disliked about it so you
Mhm.
can understand why.
You know, you brought up something that I think is really interesting around the collaborative nature of this space. It's really unusual because, technically, I guess the advisors are competitive with each other. You're all trying to serve, maybe not all, but like you're trying to serve individuals that need help with their financial planning, investments, and retirement. But it's such an open community to saying, let me share with you what I did wrong or the
Yeah.
mistakes that I made in order for you to not have to make those same ones. And I
Yep.
think that's a really noble part of this profession. And I'm glad that you brought that up. And so when you're saying a mistake that you may make or a challenge that you had may be different for somebody else, obviously, for sure.
Yes.
But was there like one thing that you're like, oh gosh, I wish I would have thought about this differently?
It might sound, no, there
I love
isn't.
that. Great.
Yeah. I think everything that did go wrong made me fully understand why it went wrong. It's like when your grandmother tells you, don't go down that street. There's a big pothole there, right? You're going to fall in it. And you're like, nah, let me go check, right? Let me tiptoe by it. So as long as they tell you, then you'll tiptoe around it. You might slightly fall in, but you wouldn't have fully had the experience. Not to say I want other people to fall in a hole, but I think it's more the pieces that did go wrong made me so much better of making that better and why I'm making that better that I don't think I would have been able to do that if I didn't go that route.
Yep.
So nope, I love it. And one great thing that I will say that this happened right at the end, right before I launched. Follow your gut. If your gut has gotten you to this point, even if you're at the wedding altar, you can still say no. So I think that is really important. Sometimes we're shy to say, oh, but I already said and I already did and I went through all the trouble. Who cares? Who cares? You can still say no if your gut is telling you this is not the right move, the right place, the right time. Follow it.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Follow your gut. And I love that you are like, hey, any mistakes that I did make, they were made so that I could learn and apply that for the future. So I think that I follow a very similar philosophy in life. So I love that. So in addition to everything you have going on, with launching your new business and writing a book and all of that stuff, you're also one of the key drivers of the SARE Latin Advisor Summit. So first, why is this important for Latinx, Hispanic advisors to have this event? And why did you feel compelled to get involved?
Being Latina, I would go to multiple events and there wouldn't be many of us. As you know, right, there's not many women in the industry. So now compound that, there's not many women who are Hispanic in the industry, right? So there's even fewer of us.
Mm-hmm.
And as I kind of noticed that more, I was at a conference and I met a wonderful woman. Her name is Ana Trujillo Limon. And we just hit it off so well. And we were really diving deep into everything. Again, the vulnerability piece was allowed. So we just really got into it. And she had been thinking about this for some time. And I was like, let's do it. We're going to just get it done. Right. So I think there's room for a smaller space because it allows that vulnerability to happen. And that's kind of our reasoning for creating SER. It's to give people that space, but I love incorporating it, right? So our end goal would be to join up with other groups, whatever they may be, however, and make a larger conference, right? Because I get that piece too. I'm a believer of why make so many little ones when all of us together can be so much more powerful. I agree with that. But we do need those little spaces just to kind of grow, and then we can grow together, and then we, you know what I mean? So it's kind of
Yeah.
like independent spaces, but that can be brought together. It's been wonderful. It's hearing the voices of the individuals that go to the conference and say how impactful it's been for them to see these things. I remember being on stage the first day and having people crying in the audience. That I'm a crier as is. That's my strength, by the way. Crying is my strength. I do not apologize for it. But it's wonderful. And there was definitely a need, and it's been great.
So first of all, that's great that you're doing that. Anna's fantastic. She works at Carson. Um, how many advisors do you expect this year, and when is the event?
The event is October 10th and 11th in the Hyatt La Jolla, San Diego. And
Nice.
we have so far 100 registered.
Wonderful. That's great. Is that growing from the prior year?
We were half, we were 50.
Wow. Well, congratulations, because it's very hard to do an event, I should know. And I applaud that. And I do think that there are places where people want to go and be authentically themselves and hear and identify with people that have very similar backgrounds, and to be able to have that kind of community is super important. So thanks for your leadership in the industry on supporting that with Anna and others. So with now we're on to our final question that I always ask all of my guests, which is, with the title and the theme of the podcast focused on the future, keys to building a profitable, sustainable and impactful business in mind, what is your last line, Vanessa? What key takeaway do you want to leave our audience with?
I think I'm typically the personality that likes to give a tactical tool, or as they call them, the hard skills. But I think my final words today are more of human skills, and that is truly kindness. I think to be profitable and impactful, we have to help others, right? And of course, we're doing that for our clients. Of course, we're doing that for our team, right? Because there's an ROI on that.
Mm-hmm.
We can see it's palatable. But what I'm saying is be kind or help someone else. Just there's so many people out there that need it. And if you have it, you don't know how big of a blessing that you can be to others. And I truly believe that what you put out in the world comes back to you. So that is kind of key for me. And I just wish more can embrace that.
Oh, what a beautiful last line, right? Really paying it forward. This has been, this has been a great profession for most of us. How do we pay it forward in some way,
Yeah.
shape, or form? And that really is the ability to leave that lasting impact. So I love that. I love that. That's, I think, one of the more unique last lines that I've heard on the podcast. And I think something that everyone can easily do and embrace. So thank you for that inspirational, pay it forward, key takeaway and last line. Again, thank you so much for being my guest today, Vanessa, and for sharing your personal journey, as well as your learnings on starting a firm and the importance of understanding the psychological component of investing. I'm Suzanne Siracuse. Thanks for listening, and I hope this episode leaves you feeling even more excited to be focused on the future.